The house stopped being a home the moment the last condolence hug ended, and the front door clicked shut. In the living room, black coats hung over the backs of chairs like shadows, and half-melted candles sagged on the mantel like exhausted witnesses to my grief. The sympathy cards, dozens of them with gold foil and hollow promises of "here for you," were lined up in a neat little cemetery on top of the piano. I stood in the center of the rug, still wearing my funeral dress, feeling the silence of my husband's absence pressing against my chest. Then, I heard the distinct, metallic turn of the deadbolt. It wasn't a sound made for safety against the outside world. It was a sound made for separation. My mother-in-law stood by the door, her hands still on the lock, her face as cold as a stone. She didn't look like a grieving mother. She looked like a landlord finishing an inspection. Grief was still heavy in the room, filling the corners where my husband used to sit, but Mercy had left through the garage with the rest of the guests. I was alone in a house that was suddenly a cage. My name is Chelsea Otmen. I am 34 years old, and I have spent the last 3 years learning how to sleep standing up beside a hospital recliner. While my in-laws rotated their brief Sunday visits and posted tasteful, filtered tributes on social media about family strength, I ran the grueling night shift of reality. My life was measured by medication alarms that shrieked at 2:10 a.m., insurance calls where I sat on hold for exactly 47 minutes, and the quiet dignity of giving sponge baths to a man who used to carry me over the threshold. I kept appetite charts on the fridge and kept emergency bags packed by the front door, ready for the next middle-of-the-night dash to the ER. They brought flowers that wilted in 3 days. I brought the continuity that kept him alive for 3 years. I was the one who handled the vomit, the bills, and the terror of every shallow breath. I sacrificed my career, my sleep, and my youth to be his primary caregiver, believing that we were a team and that his family was my family. I was wrong. His mother, Beatrice, folded her funeral program with a slow, deliberate snap and placed it on the coffee table like a closing argument in a court case. She didn't look at the photos of her son. She looked at me. "We think it's best if you transition out of this house this week," she said, her voice devoid of any tremor. "This house stays with family." I felt the air leave my lungs as if I'd been punched. I blinked once, trying to process the cruelty. "I am family," I whispered, my voice cracking. His brother Marcus stood behind her and gave a tight, patronizing smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You were supported, Chelsea," he said, using a tone you'd use for a charity case. "Not everyone gets that kind of runway after a loss. We've been very generous letting you stay here during the illness." Runway. The word hung in the air, cold and industrial. In their eyes, my 5-year marriage hadn't been a sacred union. It had been a temporary grant program that they were now choosing to defund. They didn't see a widow. They saw an occupant they wanted to evict before the soil was even settled. By the next morning, my suitcase was already waiting by the front door. I noticed the wrong zipper had been pulled. It was stuck on a piece of fabric, a sign that it hadn't been packed by me. They had gone through my things while I was at the lawyer's office. I didn't scream or throw the vase on the table. Instead, I knelt down and carefully fixed the zipper, pulling the fabric free with steady fingers. Small dignity still counts when everything else is being stripped away. "I won't make this ugly," I said to Marcus, who was watching me from the hallway like a bouncer. "Just send the paperwork to my email." Both he and his mother relaxed visibly, their shoulders dropping as if they had just won a minor skirmish. They thought I was surrendering because I was too broken to fight. They relaxed too quickly. People who underestimate paperwork usually find themselves drowning in it later, and I knew exactly which documents were missing from their files. I walked out the door with one bag, one folder, and one quiet, invisible advantage they never noticed. The keys to the kingdom were in my mind, not on their keychain. My husband's freight brokerage business looked very simple from the outside to his family. To them, it was just a series of phone calls, routes, and payments that magically appeared in the bank account. They saw the profit, but they never saw the engine. Inside, however, that business was a living, breathing engine that required constant tuning. Over the years, I had quietly built the entire carrier vetting matrix from scratch. I was the one who maintained the complex compliance calendar and negotiated every single rate exception with the difficult drivers. I managed the dispute logs and updated the fuel indexes every Monday morning. I knew exactly which drivers would answer their phones at dawn and which ones would lie to us about their location after lunch. There was no master manual in the office. There were no instructions left on the server for how to handle a crisis. Every vital piece of information existed only inside my personal notebooks and my own head. I had been the reliability layer for years, working in the shadows while they enjoyed the dividends. Now, they were about to try and run a machine without the person who built it. I rented a small furnished apartment located above a local flooring store. The air in the place always smelled like a mix of pine cleaner and industrial glue, but it was mine, and the lock worked from the inside. For the first 2 days, I turned off my phone and just slept. On day 3, the first text arrived from Marcus. Need access to the vendor portal. Password on the desk isn't working. I stared at the screen, remembering how he had sneered at my runway. I didn't type a long explanation about how I had changed the security protocols for the quarterly update. I didn't tell him that the password he had was 6 months old. On day 5, another message came, this one more frantic. Where are the backup contracts for the Northeast region? We have a driver stuck at a way station. I answered only once, keeping my voice neutral and professional. Check your records, I replied. Silence is not just the absence of noise. In business, silence is load-bearing. I knew that by saying nothing, I was letting the weight of their own incompetence slowly crush the structure they thought they had inherited. By the second week of my eviction, the first major crack appeared in the business. A major carrier's insurance authority expired, and because no one was monitoring the compliance calendar I had built, all of their loads were frozen at the border. Week 3 was even worse, delivering a cascade of billing errors. Without my oversight, they were using the wrong rate tables and applying incorrect margins, leading to a flood of angry emails from our most loyal clients. By week 4, the situation reached a breaking point when a formal compliance audit notice was triggered by the Department of Transportation. The auditor actually called my personal cell phone because my number was still listed as the primary operations lead on all the federal filings. I'm no longer with the company, I told him calmly as I sat in my pine-scented kitchen. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, a pause that felt like it weighed 5 pounds. That explains the pattern of errors we're seeing here, Mrs. Otmen, the auditor replied. The dominoes were falling exactly as I knew they would, and the in-laws were too proud to realize they were the ones who pushed them. A week later, a formal legal letter arrived at my tiny apartment. My in-laws were accusing me of withholding proprietary systems and sabotaging the family business. They were trying to bully me one last time, thinking I would fold under the threat of a lawsuit. My attorney, however, was ready. He responded not with a plea, but with a mountain of attachments. We sent over creation timestamps for the software, version histories that showed only my user ID, and payment receipts from my personal bank account. We even included the license registrations in my name from the year their main server had crashed, and I had personally paid for the renewal because the company account was frozen. Then came the twist they hadn't seen coming. I wasn't just the manager of the core routing software, I was the sole license holder. I had bought it under my own consulting LLC years ago for tax purposes. According to the records, the expiration date for their access was in exactly 12 days. I didn't send a threatening letter or demand they apologize. I simply sent a formal notice declining to renew their access. They requested an urgent meeting, but I politely offered them a slot 3 weeks out. The federal audit finally closed, and the results were devastating for the in-laws. The official findings cited a complete operational breakdown following the removal of the primary systems manager. The auditor found no evidence of sabotage and no evidence of theft. Instead, the report described a total collapse that occurs when the architect of a system leaves the building and the remaining staff has no understanding of how the foundation works. Because of the lack of oversight and the numerous safety violations they had missed, their insurance company reclassified the entire brokerage as high risk. Their annual premium didn't just go up, it increased by a staggering 118%. This wasn't just me being difficult or emotional, as they had told their friends. This was a government agency and a multi-billion-dollar insurance firm putting a stamp of failure on their management. The authority of the state had now confirmed what my own broken heart already knew. They were nothing without the runway I had built for them. Clients didn't leave the brokerage because of the family drama. They didn't care about who was living in whose house. They left because their shipments were being misrouted to the wrong states, and their invoices were suddenly double what they had negotiated. Reliability is the only currency in the freight world, and the in-laws were bankrupt. One major client sent an exit letter that Marcus accidentally forwarded to me in a panic. It said, "Your former operations manager was the reliability layer of this company. Without her, we no longer have confidence in your logistics." That single sentence traveled through the industry faster than any of the desperate apology emails Marcus tried to send. Word spreads quickly in a small circle, and soon, new opportunities began crossing the street to avoid them. They had the name of the business, and they had the physical office, but they had lost the reputation that actually made the phone ring. They had thrown me out to save the family assets, but in doing so, they had destroyed the only asset that actually produced an income. While they were fighting the collapsing business, my attorney uncovered something even more significant in the files. The refinance documents from 2 years ago, the year my husband was in heavy treatment. To get the lower interest rate, the bank had required my income to qualify for the loan. My signature was the one that secured the approval, and I had been the one making the monthly payments from my personal salary while my husband was ill. This didn't just make me a widow, it made me a legal, financial stakeholder occupant. According to the law, their act of changing the locks and forcing me out without a court order qualified as an unlawful exclusion. The tone of their emails changed from cold commands to desperate courtesy almost overnight. Suddenly, Beatrice was asking if I wanted my favorite tea set delivered to my apartment. It was funny how quickly legality could adjust someone's manners. They realized that not only was the business failing, but they were also facing a massive legal liability for the way they had treated me at the funeral. The final twist came from the very people they thought they owned, the customers. 3 of our largest former clients contacted me directly at my new apartment. They provided written proof that they were the ones who initiated the contact, ensuring there were no non-compete issues. There was no poaching on my part. These were clean lines. They didn't want the brokerage. They wanted me. I opened a small compliance and logistics consulting firm for my kitchen table, using nothing but a laptop and a very disciplined spreadsheet. By the end of the first month, my revenue was $19,260, more than I had ever made as an employee of the family business. Desperate, Marcus and Beatrice reached out to ask if I would contract back to them temporarily to help them pass the next audit. I felt a wave of peace as I typed my response. I declined with a polite 2-sentence letter and attached a referral list of other consultants. My own name was not on that list. I wasn't their runway anymore. I was my own destination. Mediation day felt like weather waiting to happen. The air in the conference room was thick with the smell of expensive coffee and stale tension. My attorney and I sat on one side, with binders open and tabs flipped to the exact pages of their failures. The dates of their insults aligned like constellations against the dates of their business losses. One by one, our settlement terms landed on the table. We demanded full financial compensation for my stake in the house, a formal written apology, and the immediate withdrawal of their wrongful eviction action. Most importantly, I required them to send a notification to all industry partners correcting the record regarding my role in the company's success. I also demanded the equity payout from the refinance stake I had secured. They signed the papers much slower than they had made their original accusations. The same hands that had turned the deadbolt against me were now trembling as they held the pen. The ink on those documents recorded the total reversal of their power. A week later, the notarized apology arrived in my mailbox. Most of it was just legal scaffolding, dry words written by a lawyer to protect them from further suits. But tucked into the middle of the third paragraph, there was one line that felt human. "We did not understand the weight you were carrying." I read it twice. I didn't keep that sentence because it brought me comfort or because I had forgiven them. I kept it for calibration. It was a reminder that people will often ignore your burden until they are forced to try and lift it themselves. While they struggled to keep the lights on, my new firm was thriving. Inside 9 months, I had crossed the threshold of 6-figure contracts. I learned that competence compounds quietly in the dark, and then it reveals itself all at once. I didn't need their house or their approval to be family. I had built a life that was sturdier than any building they could ever lock me out of. I eventually bought a small, beautiful townhouse of my own. It has a bright yellow door and a row of stubborn sunflowers growing out front that refuse to lean. People ask me if I feel like I got my revenge, but that's not the right word for it. I didn't take revenge. I took inventory. I didn't spend my time thinking about what they took from me in that living room after the funeral. Instead, I focused on what I had built with my own hands during those long years of caregiving and business management. They had tried to erase me, to treat me like a footnote in my own husband's story. But they forgot the most important rule of the world they tried to live in. I was the one who kept the records. I moved into my new home, settled onto my new porch, and watched the sunset. I realized that power can be taken, and houses can be sold, but the truth is a different kind of asset. Truth keeps much better receipts than power ever will.